Senator Booker, thank you so much for joining us on this ASP Chat. It's great to see you again.
Mark, it's phenomenal to see you. You bastard, have not shaved your head.
We tried to get him to do it all through 2020. He wouldn't do it.
Yeah, this will be the last time I do anything with you guys until I see somebody else fall.
Well, I mean, it got more gray, if that helps. So, that's we'll see where it goes next.
Well, Mark is never going bald. That head of hair isn't. You're not losing one strand
from your mouth. Well, look, this month we're really excited for you to help kick off this partnership series we're doing with Newsweek as we focus on conversations with lawmakers like yourself around issues that are most important to Generation Z. And today's focus is on police reform. We know through talking to you over the years that you have been working on this issue for quite some time. So can you just start out by telling us what police reform looks like to you?
Well, look, I ran a police department in a tough, challenging time where our city had spiking crime and we were trying to drive it down. And it was extraordinarily learning experience for me. And I still remember a conversation I had with the head of the FBI right at the beginning of my time as mayor when we were going over the data around gang violence that the FBI was involved in helping us with. And at the end, I asked him a very purposeful question. I go, how do we solve this problem? And I'll never forget the wisdom of his response. He looked at me deadpan and said, we do not solve this problem. In other words, he was clear that they were just treating the symptom of a problem, that true public safety has to go a lot deeper than law enforcement. And so right now to be involved in things with the Biden administration, from replacing every lead service line in America. Why? Because lead permanently damages brains, undermines the executive function, and is deeply correlated with crime. Or just expanding the child tax credit, cutting child poverty in half, dramatically lowers a child's involvement with police and helps with human flourishing. We need to start thinking about public safety beyond a police officer on every corner, and begin to start thinking about the kind of things that help us with our mental health challenges as a society, addiction challenges as a society, the health and well-being of our children. And at the same time, we need to be able to have more transparency and accountability in American policing, because we are putting police officers in conditions that often strain their own well-being, that put them in situations where they're more likely to break our public norms as well as the civil rights of individuals. We need to begin to better account for issues like implicit racial bias, because even police officers themselves know that the esteem of their profession is being lowered the more we are seeing these horrific incidents happen. So my goal right now, my short-term goal as a legislator, is to expand the conception of what we mean by public safety, which is investing in human beings, human well-being, human flourishing, and to create more accountability in policing so those brave men and women that do that job have the support they need, the training they need, the accountability they need, that they're not being asked to do things they shouldn't do, and that there are real guardrails that are going to help them do what we all should aspire to have, is justice in policing.
Sure. So how can we prevent, and if we can't prevent, how can we hold police officers accountable for the use of excessive force? Can Congress effectively address that problem? And if so, how?
So look, I always say accountability has three things: clear standards, ways of measuring progress to those standards. When I played wide receiver, the standards were you had to be fast. The measure was how fast you ran the 40 in. And then consequences. The third part is consequences for failure to meet those standards, real consequences. For me at football, I wasn't going to see the field unless I was fast. And so for policing, which we want accountability, one is what are the standards for policing? Let's all agree on that. Should a police officer be able to do a carotid chokehold or kneel on somebody's neck that killed George Floyd or Eric Garner? No, I don't think so. So our legislation bans certain practices and establishes certain standards. Number two is accountability. We don't even know. We have no way of measuring nationally what the police-involved use of force is in the country. And then the final thing is, when you do wrong, when you violate the law and community standards, will there be a process through the court system, civil court and criminal court, to actually hold you accountable And that runs us up against something called qualified immunity, which is on the civil side, making police officers immune often to civil challenge, and the standard with which you could be criminally culpable. Right now, it's a standard that's very, very hard, if not impossible to reach, called willfulness, that you willfully killed somebody or did them some kind of harm, as opposed to what we want to do is create a standard lower than that called reckless, a reckless disregard standard, which can help us create more criminal accountability for police officers that break the law.
So that actually bleeds right into my next question about New York City, where they just recently voted to limit qualified immunity. Could you drill down a little bit more on qualified immunity and what they did or to limit it, and did it go far enough?
Right. So I'm not familiar exactly with New York. I know Colorado, a lot of states have been moving to try to address this issue that curtails qualified immunity. Again, if you're a police officer, you don't want to have your financial world into disarray because of frivolous lawsuits. But so we have to understand that there's two sides to every story. But this idea that when you do something significantly wrong, that you violate somebody's civil rights, that there's no real accountability, is to me unacceptable. So creating the right balance and letting accountability be shared, which some other states have. They've capped the liability for police officers, but they've expanded liability for the people that are training, for the municipality, for the state, to have to make sure that victims who've had their civil rights violated, there's some accountability. And so that's the space of the balance that we're trying to strike. Because if there's no accountability for those who train police or the police officers themselves, you're not going to see real change if people can do things with impunity. And so that's the kind of area that we're trying to move the ball forward on.
What can be done to rebuild community trust in police officers, specifically in cities like Minneapolis that have been deeply affected by incidents of police brutality?
A lot has to be done, and it's not going to be done by flipping a switch with one step. And there are a lot of really good, meaningful ideas out there. And again, I would always start by saying we need to be investing in communities beyond policing. And the great example, I'll give you this, and I know Minneapolis, I can go through cities that know this pain. There is no difference in America between black folks and white folks for using marijuana. But black folks are getting arrested for simple possession at rates 3-4 times higher. And by the way, for people who don't think we still arrest people in the United States, in 2019, there were more marijuana possession arrests than all violent crime arrests combined. And so now you have black folks getting criminal convictions for doing things that 2 of the last 4 presidents admitted to doing. Now, does that help trust? The police officers are arresting black people in low-income communities and not the college kids on campus who are doing it at the same or increased rates? No. So we have to start reimagining what we're talking about for public safety. And by the way, if we move towards legalization, all of that money that's being made off of taxes on something like marijuana should be reinvested in communities that have been disproportionately targeted by police and policing to help elevate the quality of life so that police aren't necessary in the first place. And in evidence-based programs, like having co-responders for mental health, having more drug treatment programs, so you're not putting people in the criminal system, but you're putting them in a healthcare system. This helps to build trust. And so there are a lot of programs that we know work. They're not drawn to scale, because what we have seen is 20, 30 years of the federal government making money available to build jails, to build prison. Oh, let's put 1 million more cops on the streets, and not to invest in the things that actually make communities safer and more whole, where it's better for better well-being. These are all of the things that we can do to build that trust. And police departments, I helped run one as a mayor, have to be accountable with transparency, where communities know, hey, here are the stops that you've done this year. Why is there so many more black people being stopped? What are you doing for implicit bias training? There has to be more of a partnership with community. Transparency and accountability builds trust.
The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was passed by the House in March, mostly along party lines. The National Sheriff's Association objected to the bill's banning of certain military equipment from law enforcement use. What types of military equipment would this legislation restrict, and what are the pros and cons of implementing that kind of reform?
I was a mayor who believes fully that when you put armaments from military battlefields into communities, you are sending the wrong message, you're eroding community trust, and you are having the opposite effect. And so in the George Floyd Justice for Policing Act, we have a very mature approach, not a complete ban on this, but a ban on the providing of these resources, and also a ban on the ability to use them. I know there are real times that you want to have for an active shooter situation. You may want to be able to approach that active shooter environment with a military style vehicle that can withstand bullet shots, a gunfire. But we cannot continue the way we are going right now, which is further expanding the military industrial complex in a way that now is affecting our neighborhood streets and militarizing them. This program has gone too far, and we are trying to curtail it in a reasonable way through this legislation.
What's the status of police reform legislation in the Senate today? And are you optimistic that legislation can get passed? And what does that timeline look like?
Chris, I am a prisoner of hope always. So you're asking a guy that I will always believe in hope. But hope to me is the active conviction that despair will never have the last word. So I will keep trying. I'm never going to let signs of failure undermine my faith that we can do better. And so we are actively in conversations in the Senate now in a way that gives me some promise that we can make progress. But this is always going to be a difficult hill to climb. For that, I do want to say that there are really good people in the Senate, like Tim Scott, who I've been able to work well with in the past. And we have a good track record of getting things done. And so we've got the ball now, and I'm praying that he and I can advance policing in the Senate with some of our other partners and get something the House will accept and to the president's desk.
I love the idea of being subservient to hope. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, likewise. Always wonderful to see you. Always wonderful to see you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Senator Booker, on this partnership with Newsweek, and we always love having you on these ASP chats.
Thank you guys for the overly generous words, and get your asses to Jersey, please. We could hang out.